Alright, are we good?
Yeah, let's do it. Okay.
Alright,
Let's do this.
oh wait, can I, yeah. We're good, we'll share.
You guys will share? Okay.
Yeah.
Alright, so for this one we're going to focus on multi-signature, just because no pirates aren't here as well. So, I mean, we could probably touch on the privacy stuff, but probably multi-sig will take enough time anyway. So, let's just start with some of the basics around multi-signature. There's a whole bunch of different pieces that go into this. And so, we spoke a bit about some of the basics of self-custody yesterday. And so, maybe just a quick revision for people who aren't familiar, or just to make sure everyone's following along. You've got, remember, you might have your Bitcoin core that's figuring out what is the consensus. You might have the software, that might be Spectre or Sparrow or Electrum or some other software. And then you might have the devices. And so there's kind of all these different pieces to that, and you've got to think about what you're doing with all of those. So maybe let's just start with if there are any tips that you guys have around what kind of devices you like to use as part of your multi-signature setups, or what sort of things, what considerations are there around devices and multi-signature?
So what I'll say first is you can actually practice with multisig without any devices right off the hop if you want to. So we were using Blue Wallet a little bit yesterday morning. You can actually create a multisig vault with nothing more than a few mobile phones, or a combination of your computer, your phone, and your tablet, or whatever you want, just to see, like a proof of concept, to see how it works. So they allow you to basically create a key on each device and then join them together into a multisig quorum, whether it be 2 of 2, 2 of 3, whatever you want to make it, you can create. So if you're looking to just learn about it without having to buy devices yet to support it, you can do that right now. I do have a course that got a tutorial on it. So you can find that, but just know that you don't, if you're like, I don't know if multisig is for me, you can try it without having to sink money into it yet. In terms of I think down the line when you start using it, you don't want to get to the point where it becomes so complex that you start forgetting things. Like you're adding different passphrases to the individual keys, and then you're bringing them together in such a way that they all have different pins and everything like that. It can become a lot to remember. And when you're setting things up, more often than not, you are your own worst enemy if you get too complex when you're already using a solution like multisig. So just be cautious around that, and don't become so complex that you end up duping yourself out of your own Bitcoin. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll pass it down for you guys.
I don't have much to add to that.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to it either. I have not even played around with multisig yet. There was one time where Jimmy Song made a bet, and there needed to be a multisig 2 of 3, in case one of the two didn't want to give up the winnings. So I have to be like the third key in that transaction. Like I didn't have to be involved, but it wasn't simple. We used, what did they use? They used Unchained Capital. They had, I don't know if you all played around with that, if you want to mention how that works. And all 3 of us had like different hardware wallets to sign it. And like it took a good hour to like set this up. Yeah. And then thank God they kind of resolved it themselves with their 2 keys, because if I had to get back involved, it's not that simple yet, to be honest with you.
So the way a Caravan works is...
Caravan, there you go.
Yeah, so Caravan is... So Unchained Capital have their commercial vault solution, that's like their 2 of 3 collaborative custody. They've also got this open source solution called Caravan. And so you can use it online, you can also run it yourself and self-host that, and essentially what you can do is use Trezor, Ledger, and Coldcard and other, I think those are the main 3. You can create a wallet and separate those keys, obviously, and you have to have that backup file as well, because that's also part of the complexity. With that, it will create an address for you, and you can deposit coins into that, and that it will require 2 of 3 signatures. And so that's kind of just an overview. I don't know if you guys have anything you want to add there.
Yeah, maybe it's worth saying why you'd even want to use Multisig, right? Because like we're diving straight into it, but the point is it's smart money, right? And you can have something where rather than have an agreement where 2 out of 3 people need to agree that money should be spent a certain way, but the ability to spend it is really just with whoever is in possession of it, whichever bank account is sitting in or whatever. Multisig makes it, a technical, it makes an agreement something that's technically impossible to break rather than something that's legally, or morally questionable to break. So you can literally have like a board of directors as a prime example. Like our company's set up like this, so that 7 people need to vote on anything to agree on how funds are spent. But the point is the money can't move unless those 7 people sign it. So that's a complete game changer. And that's why you even think about Multisig in the first place. But there are other reasons too, for example, which is like we talked on yesterday's panel about supply chain attacks for hardware wallets, meaning that if Coldcard or Trezor or Ledger are compromised and you order one of them and you generate your seed from it, but it's not a random seed, it's something that will generate a Bitcoin address that is derived from a private key that an attacker already knows, and they monitor the address, Bitcoin arrives on it, and they steal your Bitcoin straight away. So Multisig helps you get around that, if you want to be paranoid about that, which is appropriate, by the way. You get another hardware wallet from another manufacturer, you generate Bitcoin addresses, Multisig Bitcoin addresses, that require signing from both devices, and that means even if one of them is compromised, you're still generating random addresses. So that's just some of why you might maybe want to think about doing this.
Yeah, and I mean, as to your point about having ownership be kind of the rule instead of needing to enforce it through the law. I mean, in traditional finance, and they say, ownership is 9/10 of the law, but in Bitcoin it's 10/10 of the law. If you don't have the keys, you don't have the coins, right? Another aspect of the multi-sig thing is just getting rid of single points of failure, right? So you can lose and screw up a lot and still have access to your coins with multi-sig. As long as the initial setup is pretty solid, you can lose a lot of things. And this is kind of where you get into some trade-offs, whether you set up the multi-sig entirely yourself or whether you go with one of these kind of like shared, and it's not even good to call it shared custody, but basically you're going with an Unchained or a Casa or something like that. You're trading off your privacy there, and I know for some that's just a no-go zone. But why somebody might go with something like that, and just to reiterate, we talked a little bit about it yesterday, but in say a 2 of 3 multi-sig, that's where the company that you're working with has one of the keys and you retain 2 of them. And so you have the ability to move your funds without the permission of the company. They cannot move your funds without you. And when you want to move your funds, if you lose one of your keys, you can still call on them to help you move those. But just to give an idea of how badly you can screw up in that situation, in a 2 of 3, you would have 2 devices that were set up, and you would also have the backups of said devices. And so you have 4 things that you're holding on to, probably in geographically diverse locations. You could lose 3 of 4 things and still be okay, right? Because then you can, worst case scenario, holy crap, I need to call up Casa or Unchained and they need to help me move my funds. So you could monumentally screw up, and yes, again, I'll reiterate, the privacy trade-off is a very large one. But in the context of my loved ones are not technically savvy, I'm not gonna put all of my coins here, but I want to know that in a catastrophic event, if I die and 3 of these 4 things go missing, and all they have is a single device and my death certificate, they can go to Unchained and say, hey, we need access to this, and it's not the whole stack, but at least it's something to kind of help them if they don't recall how to get access to your other coins. So again, trade-offs, but when you're getting rid of single points of failure, it's kind of nice.
Yeah, and it's also important to know, like for you to know, what the multi-sig setup is if you are not the full 100% custodian. Like if you are not 1 of 1, or you are not 2 of 2, if you're holding your coins on an exchange, or with Coinbase, or any third party that's involved, you should know. Like I don't hold any coins with Coinbase or Kraken or any of the exchanges. But if you do, you should inquire. How do they do it? Is it a 3 of 5s? Is it does the CEO have the coins like what happened with Quadriga? Like they may not disclose it. They may say this is proprietary because if we tell you what our setup is, like 3 of 5, now people are going to know that you have to find 3 people that are involved. So they may keep it hidden, but it may be public. But you should definitely inquire what the multi-sig, because they should have a multi-sig, right? If you inquire of how your coins are being protected on an exchange, and then you find out, the CEO just has it. Like that's bad. So you should know what the setup is of your third party.
Can I tell you a quick story? Just on that. This is a horror story of a now defunct Canadian exchange.
What
No. This was like before that. But it was, at the time, it was used by a fair number of people. The way that they were, and I just heard this through the grapevine of other people that dealt with them and knew the guys running the exchange. But effectively, the way that they held the coins for this particular exchange was they were on paper wallets that were just distributed in their family members' homes around. And so they if there were too many withdrawals, they'd be like, oh, we were just down for a bit. And then they'd have to drive 3 hours to their grandmother's house and pull the paper wallet out of the safe and pull some coins off the paper wallet. It was insane. I would like to hope that things have improved drastically from that point, but it just goes to show that you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. I guarantee that people that were using that exchange at the time did not think that there was some dude jumping in his Jeep driving across rural Alberta to some random grandmother's house to pull their coins off a piece of paper. So.
Yeah. Although that said, it could be that they have multi-signature. In the modern context, it might be multi-signature in different locations that maybe you do need to drive a long way away because one key is held. But of course, nowadays it would be more like keys split across multiple people and doing a 3 or 5, 2 or 3 or whatever multi-sig setup, as any reputable exchange or custodian really should be using advanced technology to secure your coins.
Though I gotta say, as a security measure, driving through the Alberta wilderness in the winter is not bad.
Yeah, but if grandma's basement floods, then the paper wallet's toast.
Yeah, maybe you want to use one of those metal etchers and not paper, but having a bunch of bears in your way is not, bad security.
So, and that's the other thing as well, just so you guys are all aware, paper wallets are basically universally discouraged nowadays. Yes. So do not use a paper wallet. You might see people on the forum say that. Just do not. Don't do it.
I'm horrified how much Bitcoin I used to have on old paper wallets.
So,
yeah.
So anyway, let's get back to multisig so you guys can get some practical, actionable tips on how to achieve this. So if you're looking to do a multi-signature and you want to DIY and maybe you want to use Sparrow or Spectre or something like that, can you guys talk through what are just high level? Now, of course, people can they can check out BTC Sessions YouTube. I've done podcast episodes with Sparrow Wallet guys, Spectre, Michael Flaxman, people like that. But can you just talk through what are the high level steps for people to set up a multi-sig?
Yeah, so effectively, again, you're going to want to choose your hardware. As we kind of discussed, it's not a bad idea to have hardware from different manufacturers because you kind of mitigate your risk there. That said, try not to overcomplicate. You're already using multisig, so in that context, I don't like the idea of adding more difficulty of things like passphrases on top of what you're already doing with multisig. It's a personal preference. If you really are game for that, then sure. But you want to keep it consistent because you're also, you know, if you have a family, you're banking on them being able to figure this stuff out if you're not available. So keep it consistent and easy in that context, and for yourself too. If you're forgetful, it's not a good idea to have different passphrases across everything. So I like the idea of having different devices, different manufacturers, and then your process is basically you pick your software. Let's say you say Sparrow Wallet, and as you go through the setup process, you're going to be, you know, when you open up, you're going to say, all right, I want to create a new wallet, and it's going to ask you if you want single sig or multi-sig, and you choose your multi-sig. It's going to ask you what your quorum is, meaning how many keys are there, and how many of those keys are required to unlock your funds. So in the 2 of 3, you would say, I have 3 devices, and I want to require at least 2 of them to unlock the funds. And what you're doing here is you're taking bits of information from already initialized devices, meaning you've already set them up, they already have their backup phrases that you've written down separately. You're taking bits of information from each device, from each seed phrase, from each private key, and you're not only creating a vault that requires 2 of the 3 keys to unlock it, but you're also, and Stefan said this the other day, you're also creating a map to your vault. And that's very important because this is something that does not exist when you're just doing single sig. You just have your backup and that's it. So you have a few things here. You have the backups of the individual devices. You have the devices themselves that are functional. And then you have a file of your multisig quorum, which is effectively tells you where the vault is located, okay? And so if you have the file active on your on Sparrow Wallet and it's just sitting in there, then all you ever need is 2 of those devices to move your funds. If you don't have that file, you can either have to bring it back into your Spectre wallet or Sparrow wallet, whatever you're using, to reload it, or you can recreate it, but that requires all 3 of the devices once again. You can no longer just use 2 of them, because remember, bits of information were used from all 3 to create the map. If you lose the map, 2 keys are going to do you no good because you can't find the vault. All right? So you have bits of information. You can still lose a lot, but you need, in that context, 3 devices, there's 3 backups. If you lost the device and the backup of the same key, you're going to need that map. Okay, so it's a little bit more involved, but you can still screw up pretty monumentally and be all right. But the second any piece of that information is missing,
You're in trouble.
you need to make sure that you're kind of changing your setup or making sure all the pieces are whole.
That sounds like a great idea, actually. I should think about that more. So, so far, I would say Cold Card has been very respected for its security. I trust Jade, maybe I shouldn't, but I trust Blockstream and what they've done over the years with their technology. And Trezor, I still think is the most user-friendly hardware wallet. I am honestly not a huge fan of the Ledger. I find it very cumbersome, personally, because I had a bunch of Ledgers at home. And I remember bringing one to my brother-in-law's house once, and cousins, I don't even remember anymore, like somebody's relative. And I'm like, yeah, Bitcoin is easy. Here, I even have a hardware wallet for you. And like an hour later, after trying to set up the Ledger, I was like embarrassed for this space. So that's why I was never a fan of that. And so if you have like a couple of these wallets, a Jade, a Cold Card, or any other hardware wallet that you like.
So right now Jade can't do, I don't believe.
Not yet.
Yeah,
It's
but
just
they're
new.
planning to.
It's new.
They're planning to, but what I would suggest with multi-signature and devices, you want to use the multi-signature hardware wallet devices that support it a little bit better. So in this case, that's wallets like Cold Card, Spectre DIY, I think
Is that a
Bitbox
hardware
O2.
wallet?
Yeah, these are all hardware wallets, right?
Okay,
So
I'm
Spectre
not familiar with
DIY
that.
is a hardware wallet. There is the Bitbox O2 and the Keystone, which used to be the Kobo, basically.
Yeah.
These wallets will actually store the multi-signature XPubs, like as in the other XPubs. And so it'll be more secure from that perspective of making sure that your address is correctly yours. Now with the Ledger, it's harder to do that because the Ledger device, it's hard on the actual device. It's not as good at. It can be used in a multi-signature setup, but it won't be able to check all the same things that those other ones I just listed out can help you check.
Another one to add there is Foundation Passport.
Right.
as
Yes.
well.
Yeah.
So those ones are pretty good. And anybody that's curious, I have most of so people can look at them. I have most of those things here, just to if you want to peek at what they look like. With the Keystone and with the Foundation Passport, they're also interesting in that, like the cold card, you can air gap them, meaning you don't have to plug them in. So the cold card, you would do that with an SD card. You can basically take the information of your transaction and get it on an SD card and port it to and from a hot internet device. So that the keys are never directly plugged into anything internet connected. And with the Keystone and the Passport, it's done via QR code. So again, those devices never get plugged in. With the Trezor and the Ledger, there's some sort of direct connection to an internet connected device. I still think like it's better than just having a hot wallet, but Bitcoiners are paranoid.
No, but the point is, that's a good thing you brought up. Like if you're storing on 3 different hardware wallets, you have used 2 of them, like as a 2 out of 3 multisig between all 3, and then if more new hardware wallets come out, you add 2 more, you earn some more satoshis, and now you can do an additional 1, 3 of 5. So you can just scale that way for your real cold storage.
Right, and so, yeah, to be clear though, that would be creating a new multi-signature and spending out of the initial set, which is a 2 of 3, into the new 3 of 5 set, which would be a specific address that you generate out of the new 3 of 5.
So you just built this pyramid of more and more security.
And also, I will just note while we're here, guys, don't go too big with your multi-signature because that can also screw. People have lost coins there, and there are funny things that can happen in terms of the fee that's required for these like larger setups. So basically, stay in the well-trodden pathways, meaning just do a 2 of 3 or do a 3 of 5 for most people, unless you really know what you're doing.
And there's also a trade-off, right? Like it's one article, I think it was in one of the Unchained Capital articles or one of the others. Like it's a graph, right? Like the more often you check on your cold storage coins, like it's your security goes down, right? Like, but at the same time, if you don't check on them at all, you could forget how to do it, right? So it's like forgetting how to keep accessing them versus constantly accessing them, potentially, ending up getting key logged or something like that, or somewhere a camera watching over your shoulder. So it's this trade-off that's like tough to navigate.
This is another thing and again, privacy. I will say it every single time, but the privacy trade-offs are big. But with something like Unchained, they have key checks every 90 days. So basically, they say after 90 days, they'll be like, hey, you need to plug in each device and just double check that everything is still kosher and works in the multi-sig quorum. You can do those at different times just to be
And that's really annoying for some of us that can travel for more than 3 months in a row.
Yeah,
Can disable it.
Yeah, and that's fine. Like, you can do it after the 90 days, but they'll just give you the notification of like, hey, you should check your key again, and then when you go to use it, they're like, okay, that looks good.
I want to add something Stefan said. If you're doing stuff like maybe you got a couple of Bitcoin, like I just want to talk about some of the practicalities here. Like if you have a couple of Bitcoin and you coin join them through Wasabi or something, you've now got 20 UTXOs, and if they're all sitting on a multi-sig transactions get big and they use a lot of space in the blockchain. And if you're going through a period where fees are really high and you've got all these UTXOs to manage, it can get unwieldy. So there is that to bear in mind. Another nice tidbit about multisig in Bitcoin, as it was written, is there's a bug in it. It was just one of the mistakes Satoshi made. There's one of the, I think it's op1, one of the opcodes. It's just needlessly on the stack, and it creates extra work for computers.
I think you're going to a level that's more technical than most
Well,
people are ever going to use right here.
Fair enough, but the point about it is though, is that every single shitcoin that forked off from Bitcoin's code left the bug in. So if anyone ever tries to tell you that shitcoins innovate, they really don't. There's the only reason that bug is in Bitcoin today is because it's a pain to fix it. We have to hard fork.
Yeah, but I mean, the short version for people here is like if you're using Sparrow and Spectre and things, like it's already like they're already So don't like basically at your level. For most of you, you don't need to be like, oh, what about this bug? No, like.
You mean Lodash hasn't figured out how to turn that one into a soft fork?
No, that one's a hard fork.
That has to be hard forked out. It doesn't make any difference. It's just the sort of thing where you
Yeah.
Alright,
So let's transition over. We're going to transition over now to privacy, but I'll just give you a few last tips. Think about as well regular checking your keys, and also think about backup and recovery. Right. So think about if you lost one of your things, can you recover it? Also, the other aspect of like the analogy I use is like imagine you want to learn how to walk a tightrope. You don't learn with the tightrope 30 meters above the ground. You start with that tightrope at like 30 centimeters, right? You can do a test setup with like $100 in there, test it out on that, and then slowly, as you get more comfortable, then you can start raising that tightrope and start putting more coins in there to secure it that way. So that's just a tip there.
So we're
Yeah.
So on a scale of like at the ground and 30 meters up, what did Ethereum start?
Right, all the way up there. All the way. I mean, they don't even have multisig, so
I'm talking about just the general.
But in general, yeah, of course. I mean, they're just like, yeah.
I was just gonna say, if like at the break, if anybody wants to try setting up just like a mobile multisig, just to give it a go, just come find me. I'll play around.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk privacy for a sec,
Yeah.
and maybe I can touch on something else as well. We would, as I mentioned, the size of multisig transactions is unwieldy, but there is an upgrade in the works. There's no time frame for it yet, but everyone here has probably heard about Taproot, right? Even if you might not know the nuance of it, that's an upgrade that's coming out in Bitcoin very soon, and it was combined with part of the Schnorr signature upgrade. Sorry if I'm getting too deep again, but we didn't do all of what Schnorr Sigs offer, and the rest of what they offer will be along eventually, and the main thing they offer is signature aggregation, which means when you use multisig, you don't use any more space because all the signatures combine, which is going to be awesome. That will mean using multisig and things like the privacy technology of coin joins. I promise I won't get controversial here. When coin joins are expensive because if there's 100 inputs and 100 outputs, that's 100 signatures, and you divide that between you, but you're all paying the cost of one normal transaction each to do one giant transaction. When you can combine them all together, you get this amazing advantage, which is we have 100 inputs and 100 outputs, and we combined all the inputs into one signature. So that's a normal transaction with a normal fee split between 100 people, which means your transaction fee could be so low to do an on-chain transaction that's a coin join, and it's cheaper than if you were to just do a transaction that wasn't, which is like the holy grail in Bitcoin. Because imagine if people said use Tor browser, use the Tor network, but if you do it, your internet will be faster and better in every way rather than slow and clunky, which is what Tor often is.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see with the crossing.
Real quick, just real quick, because you mentioned that bug I shared, I didn't even know about it, and the only way to fix it is with a hard fork, and Bitcoin is now at a point where everyone knows it's a bug. No one is going to debate it, but no one is interested in hard forking it because they know it's going to turn out to be a giant disaster. This is why a hard fork is not possible.
Well, with that bug, it really doesn't make that much difference. It's just one of those things where it's just not perfect, but it doesn't actually affect anyone in reality. But it is the kind of thing that if and when Bitcoin does eventually hard fork, because it is going to need to at some point, it's one of those things where we'll be like, oh,
do that along with it. Yeah. So
let's hold it over again.
Guys, let's bring it back. We're going into crazy. You guys, I'm going to hold you back. This is too let's keep it actionable and reasonable for people. So high level. What are the considerations around Bitcoin privacy? Like in a very high level sense, what are the things we should think about?
Start with that.
Yeah, sure.
First, where do you get your coins? If you're on a KYC exchange, then you're already sacrificing privacy. You're already going to be tasked with, if you want any degree of privacy, breaking the links between those coins and you. But there's always going to be some sort of record that you previously bought those coins. And so in an instance where someone is demanding to know where they are, you need a plausible story as to where you hold them or why you no longer have them, right? So you got to keep that in mind. So if you can get, if you can mine coins, or if you can get them peer-to-peer in a decentralized fashion using something like BISC, fantastic. You're off to an awesome start. That can be difficult for some, but I think it's a good goal.
You need Bitcoin in the first place to be able to use BISC, so it's a bit recursive. So.
Yeah, but you can get your first spot from like a family or a friend, a small amount, just to get started.
Yeah, exactly. And then after that, there's kind of two different aspects, and you may want to add on to this, but there's network level privacy. So when you're sending transactions, are you leaking your IP address as you do that? So this is why running a node is important, so that you're not calling out to somebody else's node every time. So if you just download a wallet and you've got Bitcoin on your phone, and the wallet that you're using on your phone is not actively pointing to your own node, you're giving up information every time you send a transaction. It's the same with a wallet on your computer, all right? Keep that in mind. That's one aspect of why you want to run a node. And then the other aspect is kind of your UTXO management, the history of those coins and when you use them and what you've done with those coins. So you can think of it like if you spend money, spend Bitcoin at a place that knows who you are, not only do they see the money that you gave them, but they see the change from that transaction. It's like if I go to the corner store and I use a $100 bill to buy a candy bar. If the candy bar was $2, the person behind the till knows that I have 98 other dollars. If you spend $5 worth of Bitcoin with a UTXO that is an entire Bitcoin, that person sees that you have an entire Bitcoin. So this is where UTXO management comes into.
And they can follow that around.
And they can follow that around. So you think of that person sees your change, and then think of that change as basically, like marked bills with ink, and everything that it interacts from then on in, it kind of, I don't want to say taints, but it basically shows a pattern, and people can very quickly start to paint a picture of how much Bitcoin you own.
And that is, that could be good or bad, for example, like not all, no, you have one first. That could be bad in some cases, but that could be good in other cases. Like for example, I want the tax revenue of the US government specifically, because they're the ones that collect the most taxes around the world. I want to see that. Like I want the US government to put all tax collection and all tax spending, more important than the spending, on the Bitcoin blockchain. So any developer with like 1 year of basic university or like on your own studying from YouTube can go ahead and audit like where the US government's tax revenue is going, right? Like so transparency in the blockchain isn't necessarily bad in many cases.
This was a big point about why so many authorities might dislike Bitcoin, because it stops them. It means they have to do everything necessarily in public. Like if governments have large stashes of Bitcoin, it's not unreasonable to say, okay, we're going to track what you're doing with it. How was this spent? How was this spent? Because I mean, so much of this is done in privacy, right? Because of the financial system allows it. Like, I mean, we've seen that a lot. Can I go off something you were talking about there with BISC? Oh no, it's left my head.
Okay, so let me bring it back then. So a couple things there. So high level, you've got network privacy and what's called a transaction graph privacy. So this is what we're talking about here in relation to following what's going on the blockchain. And so this is where chain surveillance firms can try to trace not only forward but also backward. And so to Ben's example earlier about this idea of using a $100 bill to buy a $2 piece of candy, this could also have very serious implications if you're a whale and you've got, because remember with Bitcoin, it's like you're spending like a hunk of gold and you're melting it down and recasting it. So as an example, let's say you've got 10 Bitcoin and you want to spend 1 Bitcoin to tone, what's the change output going to be? 1 is going to tone and 9 Bitcoin is coming back to you, right?
Can I just ask, like, how many people know what a UTXO is?
Pretty good. So it's like a piece of a Bitcoin, right? So it's not an account.
Unspent transaction output.
Yeah.
So
So think of it like a little hunk of gold or a little hunk of Bitcoin, and it carves up and it goes out to who you're spending, and you get the change back. Now, there's a very serious implication of that, because if you have a lot of coin, and imagine you spend, all right, just to make a silly example, imagine you had 10,000 Bitcoin UTXO, you're a massive whale, and you spend that just for like a small amount, that merchant, or even anyone kind of who's externally observing on the chain, is going to know that you're a massive whale. They might try to follow you home that night. So that's where, like, checking and using privacy techniques like coin join and spending in a way that's breaking some heuristics might be important to you in the future, because it might not matter as much to you now, but let's say 1 Bitcoin now is 60K. Imagine 10 years from now if it's like 10 million, it's going to have an impact.
And it can be actually worse than that. Even when you spend to yourself, here's an example, right? Like, let's say you haven't accessed your cold storage in a while, right? And back in the day it wasn't much, but today it's something like 10 Bitcoin. And you're like, man, like I have to, the wallet stopped working, so I have to go and find that private key, the 24 words, and see if I can recreate that in another wallet. So you do, and you're like, but I want to be sure that it works. So I'm just gonna send $5 from this stash of 10 Bitcoin from myself to myself within the same wallet, right? And you think that's harmless, but now someone sees like a 10 or a 20 Bitcoin transaction on the blockchain. So it's like, oh, there is another person that clearly has access to 10 Bitcoin. I don't know who they are. There was no store involved. You sent it from yourself to yourself. But the change of 10 Bitcoin is all of a sudden in a block. And now that could be of interest to be monitored going forward in case you do spend it with the KYC thing.
So here's some practical advice I'd like to give. If supposing you've got 200 grand and you want to buy a bunch of Bitcoin with it, and you intend to make purchases with it, quite often they're very small. The way stuff is worked out at the moment, and what Sparrow have done recently, is absolutely beautiful. We've got this perfect, the technology is facilitating us to do things in a really good way at the moment. So you could buy your 200 grand worth of Bitcoin or whatever, have this giant UTXO, which is where you withdraw it from the exchange, and you have a $200,000 Bitcoin UTXO. Now, as everyone's mentioning here, you don't go and buy stuff with that, because you're betraying the fact that you have this 200 grand output. And even if you send 10 grand of it at a second address, and then you go and spend some money from that 10 grand UTXO, it's still not great, because they can just go back one hop.
Go to teal chain.
Yeah. So what you can do, thanks to Wasabi and Sparrow, is you could just break off chunks of it as and when you need. So you've got your 200 grand UTXO, you take maybe $1,000 of it, stick it in Sparrow, and then you get Sparrow coin joining, and it will keep coughing up 100,000 SAT UTXOs for you that are completely, well, not completely, but increasingly harder and harder to trace back to the original source. So you've got your 100,000 SAT UTXO, another 100,000 SAT UTXO, maybe it's been through 11 rounds of mixing or whatever, and at that point you can go out and spend that, and whoever it is you're spending it to can look at the blockchain and they have no clue that it goes back to this $200,000 UTXO set. And if you wear the kind of clothes I wear, no one is going to follow you home and try and steal. Like, this is a practical way to use Bitcoin. If you want to go to El Salvador and hang out at Bitcoin Beach and you want to start buying like pizzas and stuff, like, this is essential knowledge. You can't go there and break off your 200 grand UTXO and pay.
Especially when the whole country now knows Bitcoin.
I was just going to add one other level of privacy to that. If you really wanted to, you could use something like Sparrow, do your CoinJoin there, and then utilize a UTXO there to open a Lightning channel if you really wanted to. So you've got the on-chain privacy to then open a Lightning channel, which adds another layer of, okay, I'm now spending on Lightning, and all of that is onion routed, and everybody that routes that transaction, like there's, yeah, if you're face to face with a merchant, they're gonna see it. There is some degree of, they can kind of probe and see what nodes are relaying those transactions, but if your node is not public, like if people don't know whose Lightning node is whose, then there's a degree of privacy in that too.
Yeah, I want to just make one last comment on a bigger scale. We're in this world where privacy is being destroyed, like demonized, in fact, where privacy in everything should be essential. I mean, again, I'm going to be a little US-centric, but it's the Fourth Amendment of the US Constitution out of the original, I think, 10 that they started with. And that whole amendment is based on privacy because was the main thing for the U.S. Independence to get out of England, and it was privacy. It was so important, and it's been destroyed. And I think the main reason is, well, everyone's on Facebook anyway. No one cares about their privacy, and this concept of, you know, if you're trying to put on clothes or your house isn't made of glass, then you're doing something wrong, where it should be essential. And it continues to be demonized and almost accepted, like you don't deserve any privacy.
Yeah.
And hopefully the mentality on that will eventually change. Like when everything is so open, the pendulum will swing the other way. And right now, the pendulum is still swinging towards no one having any privacy.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We've got a couple minutes for questions. Guys, any questions on multisig or privacy? Anything that was unclear? Go on. I'll walk up to you for a sec.
Just a quick question. In terms of using multisig, can you use a single signature hardware device as part of a multisig setup, or do you have to have a separate device?
No, you can absolutely have so devices aren't designated as single or multi. You can do both. So I think your question is, if you're currently using something as a single sig hardware device, can it also simultaneously be part of a multi-sig? And the answer is yes. And the reason you might actually do that is that the single sig device could be a bit of a decoy, right? Like if you know, the Bitcoiner $5 wrench attack, right? Somebody breaks into your home, threatens you with a $5 wrench and says, give me all your Bitcoin, and you've got a hardware wallet sitting there. If there's nothing on it single sig, they're gonna start asking you questions, especially if it's sitting in a safe or something, right? But if there's a decoy amount of Bitcoin on it, then somebody will break into the house, say, give me all your Bitcoin, you pull up your hardware wallet, they look, and they're like, okay, all right, great, send that over here.
Sorry, there's another really neat trick before I forget it. Somebody told me, I think it was like NVK, where you should have like a private key somewhere in your laptop, right on the desktop, with maybe, you know, $100 in it, and check it. Because if that's gone, that means someone has access to your laptop.
Yes. Yeah, it's and to actually add to the beauty of this decoy here, and I have a comment on what you just said too, but to add to the beauty of the decoy single sig is there's no indication to the individual that it's even part of a multi-sig. They cannot tell just by looking at it. All they're gonna see, unless you have like a copy of the multi-sig quorum sitting with it, they're not gonna have a clue. So that's beautiful. And to your point about that decoy wallet, I actually did that early on in like a cloud, I think it was like a Google account. And I just put literally like a paper wallet, like the PDF of it or whatever, JPEG of it sitting in my Google account, and I checked it a few days later and it was empty. It was like $20 on there. I mean, now it's probably way more.
Are you
So
saying
that's kind of
Google
sad.
spies on us?
Yeah, and you can do that with other stuff, like in your email, right? Like in your Gmail, in your Yahoo email, just send yourself an email. It's like Bitcoin private key title, and you put the private key in the email with like $20-30, and check it every 6 months, see if it's gone. Because if it is, that means someone has either a Yahoo admin or Google admin. I mean,
It's a
that means
canary,
someone's sweeping.
canary in the coal mine, right? It warns you.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
all right, next question.
You mentioned that you can buy peer-to-peer, but as I understand, there is a history. The coin has a history already, so if you buy it from somebody, unless it's a miner, it kind of has a history, right? So that's one. And second, as regards the coin join, if you could kind of explain it again, how really you can. I understand it's not deleting the history or cutting it, the history out of it, but it's just mixing with something, as I understand. Yes.
So question one was, when you buy, even if you buy peer-to-peer, aren't you just taking on the privacy of the person who you just bought the coins from? And second question, maybe just a quick high-level overview of how a coin join works and what it's breaking.
Yo, don't leave, because the man who, this is the world's
Okay.
authority on CoinJoin, so he wants it.
And Napara is gonna do a solo presentation right after lunch. So.
Okay.
Alright. Yeah, so, I mean, the idea with BISC, something like that, if you buy, look, if I buy peer-to-peer, which can mean in fakes person to person, if I give you $5 for your Bitcoin that you bought on Coinbase and is linked to your identity very strongly, and it becomes my Bitcoin. Unless one of us keeps a receipt of that, I mean, it's not perfect privacy, right? I mean, when there's a transactional nature of things, you have to not have the mentality that there's such a thing as perfection, and as with security as well, there is no perfection. You just can't be low-hanging fruit. So they're not going to come after everyone for these small transactions that are impossible to document anyway. So if I buy a little bit of Bitcoin on BISC, usually it's not done person to person. Usually there's a bank transfer involved. You both lock up Bitcoin in a kind of escrow of sorts. I'm actually confused about the new process, but you both put Bitcoin in as a deposit. The bank transfer is made first because, of course, bank transfers are reversible. The Bitcoin transactions aren't, so that is the very last thing that happens. So if I'm selling Bitcoin to you on BISC, I can make an offer of, say, usually people do 1 million sats. I'm selling 1 million sats, here's my offer, you come along and take it, we both put in a little bit of Bitcoin, then you would send some money from your bank account, or you can do cash by mail, they also do that, or PayPal, there's all sorts of ways in which BISC allow various transfers to happen, but it doesn't happen through their network, right?
So I think the point is basically that you're not doxing out to the whole world, you're just doxing to one person. Right?
Exactly.
I think that's the key point you're trying to make, right? It's that there is no perfect privacy, but if you're doxing only to one person, that's better than doxing to an entire company or to an entire
But to add to it, the point is when I send the Bitcoin to you, if that Bitcoin that you now have gets used for something illicit and the authorities come looking for it and they know who I am and they knew I had the Bitcoin, then I have to tell them, oh, I sent it to this guy. And the point is that it's not perfect, right? I can do that. I can remember the bank balance or the bank address of the person, the name and stuff that it was sent to me from. So there's no.
This is also one of the reasons why you may not want to use that nodes field that has been added to so many wallets, unless you're actually doing it for other people or
No, but that's-
part
One
of
of
the
your own
business.
reasons for that, because you might need to coin control to say this is from a KYC source and this is from a non-KYC, so it's kind of, you have to make your own.
Yeah, we also don't want to put a node non-KYC.
Well, you might just say where you got it from. And then I'll give you just a quick explanation around coin join. So think of it as you are breaking the link between the past and the future of that coin, if you will. So let's say you all enter, 10 sorry?
Is it about the change?
No, it's more
So
like.
let's say 10 of us get together with, 0.2 of a coin and we all change it around, and then now, from then on, you can't trace back behind that coin join. So you have what's called forward privacy. So think of it as it's like a combined spend, but they use like special Chaumian kind of blinding magic to kind of make it so that you don't know who got whose coin.
Yeah, it's imagine if everybody in this room had a $5 bill, you could watch individual people transact and your name was on the bill as you spent it. Whereas instead, if we all threw our $5 bills in a big fishbowl and
imagine we had like blindfolds on and we just pick out a five.
It's not that that the person still has the same amount of Bitcoin likely, but you don't know which UTXO is theirs. So you can't then see moving forward what they then do with their money. So
the point is, the only thing you know is that the UTXO you're getting out of it is not the one you put in. It's not related to. You don't get the same money back.
Yeah. That's why it's kind of like imagine we just put a blindfold on and we all put $5 in and take $5 out, and that's kind of like that. I'm being a bit imprecise, but yeah. All right, guys. So that's all we've got time for this panel. Hopefully that was educational for you guys. And thanks to our panelists.
all right, thank you.